Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Matt. In the last couple of videos we've been talking about the different kinds of meaning. We've talked about emotive, cognitive meaning. We've talked about vagueness and ambiguity. In this video we're going to talk about the difference between intentional and extensional meaning. The first term is intention, and we've got a definition that includes a word that we haven't talked about before, connotes. So intention, the intentional meaning of a term is the qualities or attributes that that term connotes. And what we mean by connote or connotation is the kinds of things that are brought to mind in a typical speaker of the language. So we're doing instruction in English. So the typical speaker of English, what kind of attributes come to mind when you hear the word cat? And when you hear the word cat, you think of these kinds of things. Furry, four-legged, makes purring noises, likes to be petted, those kinds of things. So it's the typical things that are brought to mind, attributes or qualities, when a competent speaker of the language hears the word. Extension, on the other hand, refers to the members of the class the term denotes. And denotes, or denotation, refers to something out in the world. So connotation has to do with what's in their mind. Denotation is out there in the world that you can point to. So when I hear the word cat, what comes to mind is the connotation, furry, four-legged, purring, likes milk, those kinds of things. The extensional meaning, on the other hand, is the cats that we can point to out in the world. So the members of that class that the term denotes. Okay, so that's the difference between intention and extension. Here's some examples. So think of the term pickup truck. Intentional meaning has to do with it's got four wheels, it's a vehicle, it's got a bed. These are the things that come to mind when you hear the word pickup truck. When you hear the word, these are the kinds of things that are typically brought to mind of a competent speaker of English. The extensional meaning, on the other hand, are the actual trucks themselves. We can think of a whole group or a class of all the pickup trucks in the whole world, and that will be the extensional meaning. When I explained what connotation was, I used this phrase that what is brought to mind of the typical speaker of the language, a competent speaker of the language. There's actually a couple of different ways that you can interpret connotation. And I'm just going to tell you this a little bit just so you understand this concept a little bit more. So some people opt for what's called an objective connotation, and it's kind of like the things, the attributes or the qualities that must come to mind in a person who hears this word. The problem with objective connotation is different people are going to have different things that are brought to mind when they hear the word. So I know that some people have pleasant thoughts that come to mind when they hear the word cat. Some people have unpleasant thoughts when they hear the word cat. So if you really hate cats, when you hear that word, what is brought to mind might be something really awful, disgusting, how much you hate them, that you cringe when you think about cats. Whereas somebody else, when they hear the term, they think about how cute and cuddly cats are. So there's two different connotations for the same word. Well, according to the objective connotation, there's one right way for terms to connote. Subjective connotation is going to allow for differences. So these are the attributes that actually occur in the minds of people who use them. Well, there's problems with both of these. The problem with the objective connotation is, how do we figure out what the objective connotation is? Does that mean that some people are wrong and some people are right when certain things are brought to mind when they hear the term? And how do we decide which ones are right and which ones are wrong? It's a really difficult question. If we go for the subjective connotation, we've still got a problem because there's not going to be a single connotation that we can point to, because everybody's got a slightly different thing that comes to mind when they hear that word. All right, so that's blocked out a little bit right here. But here's what this says. The conventional connotation is attributes that typically come to mind in a competent speaker of the language. So this is the way our book's going, or this is the definition of connotation that our book is going to use, and I'm going to go with that for our purposes. So connotation refers to attributes or qualities that typically come to mind in a competent speaker of the language. Some terms have empty extension. Remember, extension is the things out in the world that you can point to touch, taste, feel, see. Think of this phrase, currently living dodo bird. So a long time ago, when someone said this phrase, what are brought to mind are the facts that people know about dodo birds. You might not know any facts about dodo birds because they're extinct. But as of now, dodo birds are extinct. So currently living dodo bird might have intention, what comes to mind when you hear that, but it has no extension. It's an empty extension because there are no currently living dodo birds. So that's what we mean by empty extension, a term with no members in the class. Here's some other examples. Imaginary creatures like unicorns, hippogriffs, and woozles. These all have empty extension. They don't have empty intention because typical people, typical competent speakers of the language have certain things that come to mind when you hear the corn. You think of a horse with a single horn in the front of its head that farts rainbows. That's the intentional meaning. It's not empty. But the extensional meaning is empty. It has an empty extension because there are no such things as unicorns. So I'll just talk about this really quick. You might run across this in your homework. Think about the difference between intension and extension by thinking about increasing or decreasing intension or extension. So let's talk about the first, increasing intention first. If we were to arrange terms in order of increasing intention, then we're going to have to arrange the terms in a way that the further down the line we get, the more things come to mind, the more details come to mind. So the reason why we list animal first and tiger last is because when you what comes to mind when you hear animal? It's not very specific. But when you think of tiger, you can lots more details are brought to mind. So it's got more intention than animal does. Because now I'm thinking of, oh, it's got stripes and they're really big and they live in Siberia. Those kinds of things. So that's increasing intention. More things are brought to mind when you hear the word tiger than when you hear the word animal. And as we go along the line, more and more things are brought to mind. So there's lots of different kinds of animals. But the next term, mammal, is going to bring more specific things in mind, like they have to be warm-blooded, for instance. And then feline, even more specific. So more things are brought to mind. All right, increasing extension is when the terms denote more and more things out in the world. So notice they're in the reverse order. When we go from increasing intention to increasing extension, the order reverses. When we think about the denotation of tiger, it's only going to refer to the tigers out in the world. And there's not that many tigers out in the world compared to felines. Because once we move up to felines, there's a whole lot more things we can point to, like house cats. And when we move to mammals, there's a whole lot more, even more things that we can point to out in the world, like dogs and koalas. And finally, animals has the most of this series of terms. So increasing intention refers to the number of things that are brought to mind by the term. Increasing extension is the number of things we can point to out in the world.